If I had one superpower, I would do crazy things for the superpower. I would pause time. If I could do this, I would pause time for probably 4 months.
Genies, if you're listening.
And I, who?
Genies.
Genies? Yeah, well, what's the cursed thing? After those 4 months, I instantly age 4 years.
You'd still do that.
I would probably still do that. Hello, and welcome to the Open Hardware Manufacturing Podcast, the podcast about making open source hardware. My name is Stephen Hawes.
And I'm Lucian Chapar.
And today's episode comes from a question from OG, which is all about making yourself obsolete. We talk about offloading tasks to other people, what things should be offloaded, and how much stuff is required to make sure that offload happens correctly. Is it documentation? Is it training? We talk about starting a job and immediately spending $135,000 and the responsibility of having to deal with an offload that is of that tier, and also how maybe you don't offload such large things like a crazy big purchase and you kind of walk people into responsibility, and how I will probably need videos pried from my cold dead hands if I'm ever to offload that kind of thing. And once you have offloaded that task and given it to somebody else to do, how do you make sure that they're doing it consistently, that they're doing it well, and QC them? And how do you build up that trust that that thing is being done correctly?
Yeah, so there's a lot to this one. We really tear into it.
Yep, and it's definitely a tricky thing to do as you're growing a thing, because you can't do everything. You only have so many hours in the day as one person, so yeah, this is a good one. It's a tricky thing to do, but yeah, it's a good chat.
Yeah, let's get into it.
Let's do it. All right, so the topic for this week's episode comes from OG from our Discord server, and they ask a question about making yourself obsolete. And we talk a lot about we should be doing what we're the most uniquely good at. So their question is about how do you actually offload some of those things? Maybe you're the most uniquely good at a certain task, but you're running out of time. How do you get the other people to be uniquely good at that thing and free up your own time to work on something else? And it's a tricky one. And they ask a whole bunch of questions. It's a great post, and we're going to address it in this episode. So this all comes from an idea that we've had from the beginning of Opulo that one of our investors, Joel Spolsky, gave us for advice, which is that we should only ever be working on what we're the most uniquely good at. Like, what are we uniquely bringing to the table? That is where all of our focus should be. What makes us unique? All the stuff that's sorted, and we talked about this in a million other episodes, but like Tool or Project is very much in line with this. You know, we don't do HR ourselves. We offload that. We're making pick and places. All of our focus should go into that new thing we're doing there. And I think it's important distinction to say that it's not necessarily what we're uniquely skilled at, because like me and Bryce are both capable with an hour of training to make drag chains. And like I said in that previous episode that I'm actually very bad at it now.
Yeah, hour and a half for Stephen.
And yeah, it takes me a lot longer. But like if I were to do it as much as Bryce did, I'd probably I don't know, Bryce is really good at doing things correctly, but I'd still be able to do it, right? So anyone could eventually get to the point where they could do that. But like making a firmware release, I'm the only one at the company that can do that right now.
Right. We have this notion of keep the programmers programming.
Yeah.
So if Stephen's uniquely good at doing that, he shouldn't be making drag chains.
Right. Like, what's the most shiny Pokemon, the most rare thing that you have that no one else can do? That should be the first like slot filled. Mm-hmm. In my mind of like, everyone has a calendar, you know?
Yeah.
What blocks go into what sections of task? If I'm the only one that can do something, I should probably be doing that, you know? And if other people could with quick training, because Bryce could also do a firmware release. It took me years of writing firmware to figure out how to get close to doing what we do here. But he could, but it would take years, you know?
Yeah. And as a company, there's only so much time we can allot for someone to learn something. So like we just have to become reasonable there and have expectations of, yes, people can learn and grow. But also, we're not waiting for Bryce to be the firmware engineer for next week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
That's not fair to him. It would be stressful.
It would be very stressful, yeah. And also, does he want to do it?
Yeah.
You know, which we actually get into later. There's a really good thing we got from one of our favorite people at Forum Labs about kind of like, how do you give tasks to people? But we'll get to that a little bit later. But this is kind of what this whole idea is about, is like, we keep the programmers programming. Like, what are you going to be the most effective at? That should be your main focus. So if you have things like me making drag chains, when did we decide to have me not do that anymore?
Yeah, because originally even you and I were the only ones building the BYOP kit for the Lumen.
It was you, me, and Jaden, and we were just cleaning extrusion and making motherboards and bagging bolts. And like for like that first like 3 weeks before we launched the first set of kits, we were just getting grubby, just sleeping in the office, trying to get things out before a launch date that we had kind of set ourselves to.
Yeah, we were offloading nothing.
Yeah, we were offloading nothing. Literally everything was us. And that was pretty rough. So, yeah.
Yeah, we knew we needed help, and we had to figure out the balance of when to get it.
Right. So sometimes you just know because it's literally impossible for all the tasks that need to get done. You can't do it with X number of people. There's only so many hours, you know?
Right. As soon as the BYOP shipped, I had to get busy on reordering, and Stephen had to get busy on supporting the community.
And we had only fulfilled like half of the orders we got in like the first like 3 days or something, 2 days.
Yeah.
So we still had to be making them. It was like very obvious right out of the gate. Mm-hmm. Oh my Lord, we have so many, we have a lot to do still. We need help.
Yeah, the work was cut out for us.
Right. So that's the first thing is like, do you need more help? Which is pretty easy to just be like, well, am I working, 90-hour weeks? Maybe I could use a little help. That might be useful. But then it's like, okay, so then what do you offload? What do you give to somebody else? And I kind of think, tell me if you disagree with this. I kind of think it's like, it's a balance of a lot of different weighted factors, and different factors have different weights depending on how important they are or what the task is. And there's a lot of those factors that like, is this a good offloadable thing?
Right.
So some of these are like, can we condense the role into like explicit, clear written instructions? And there's no ambiguity.
Yeah, for sure. You and I, we kind of try on every role we'd think to hire for.
Yeah.
Because we have to be able to explain it concisely, write it up into an SOP ideally.
Yep.
And like understand what it's like to operate in that capacity here.
Yep. And I think that mainly goes towards techs. Because like knowledge workers, like that kind of thing, we're going to give them something amorphous.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really good task of like for offloading to a tech, like an assembly thing. Can I be incredibly explicit about the process so there's no ambiguity in it? Sometimes we do offload things that are ambiguous, but that's kind of a separate thing.
Yeah.
Also, do we have the budget to hire for it? Or is there enough time for another person that's already here to take that thing on? Like if I'm feeling super overwhelmed and I have a bunch of stuff on my plate and I'm like, oh, there's this thing I could give Lucian. And you're like, I'm drowning. I also have a lot of stuff I'm trying to do right now. Then it's like, whatever. But if you're like, yeah, no, give it to me. Okay, cool. Then it's worth offloading.
For sure.
So that's also part of it. And can we afford to hire another person to take on that extra task? Or do we just work longer hours and try and do it ourselves?
Or flex the overtime budget.
Yes. Or flex the overtime budget. Yeah, exactly.
That's another way to offload and to get more work out of someone.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Can't do it forever.
Totally. Yep.
And then there's how long would it take to train someone up on the process?
Right.
Do we have time for someone hired on into the team to learn this thing?
Right.
How long would it take to train someone up on building like a feeder, for example?
Right. Yep.
And we have to make it very easy there. Mm-hmm. Someone can make a feeder on their first day.
Yep.
But for other things, maybe someone is being hired on to run the print farm.
Right.
We would hire someone who knows how to use a printer ideally, because there's a lot to be said about maintaining those guys.
Yeah. Oh yeah. There's a ton. We have a whole process and like firmware and slicer compatibility dependencies and like it's a thing. So like how long would it take to train them? Is it going to be worth it to train them on the thing? Like if it's a huge task to train them, like, I mean, a great example I think of is like Aligny, like you managing Aligny. How long would it take you to train someone? We so fail the bus test with Aligny, dude. Yeah. We so fail the bus test. But like if you were like, okay, I want to offload all purchasing and all management of doing builds and like making builds to someone. That would take it would take 3 weeks to offload that to me.
Yeah.
And I would still not do it well, I think, in comparison to how well you do it,
I don't know. There's always room to improve. I recently offloaded SMT component purchasing to one of our technicians.
Yeah.
And that was great.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't the one consuming that stock. Mm-hmm. I didn't have great oversight of how it was depleted, how some of the material was wasted.
Right.
It was great.
Yeah.
So it was a no-brainer to offload that one.
Yep. Yeah, because it could be written up pretty cleanly. Mm-hmm. They had an understanding of it. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and especially because you're not purchasing from a person you talk to. It's as simple as Amazon or MasterCard.
Yeah. That
was a no-brainer for offloading. A win for everyone. It gave the technician some extra skills, extra padding for the resume.
Yep.
Gave some workload off my plate.
Yeah, that was a good win.
Yeah, and like, let's say they did make a mistake. How revertible is a mistake? I could always return something.
Right.
That they bought extra of.
Sure.
Like no harm really.
Yep.
Tied up a couple extra bucks for a few days, but
Yep.
Yeah.
It's
fine.
If it's still offloading that task off of your plate, that's so good. Like, okay, whatever, we have to return something. Or like they buy too much or too little of something and we have to spend a little bit more on shipping. That's just the cost of teaching someone how to do this well and offloading it. Like at first, they're not going to do it as well as you would. Mm-hmm. They're just not ever going to.
Yeah.
And that's okay. That's what it means to offload the thing. Eventually they'll get better and eventually they'll get better than you. Like Bryce kicks my butt at drag chains,
I
and a bunch of other things.
Yeah. I don't even mind mistakes as long as they get caught before it ships to the customer because that's where they learn the best.
Exactly.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. That's a whole other point too,
Yeah.
is like, if we can catch the mistake that also makes it a lot easier to offload something. Like if there's something where if they can make a mistake and it goes into the void and there would never be a time where we could catch it, then it makes it a lot harder to offload that thing. But like purchasing parts is a great example. You have whoever's doing purchasing for SMT components. You look at the DigiKey and the LCSC order list.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, great. Here's all the things. And you double check it before we pull the trigger. Like that's very easy to do. It takes you, 30 seconds to give it a once over. And so it's easy to check, easy to outsource. Yeah. That's a great one to delegate.
It was funny too, because when this person originally did purchasing, their credit card limit was $200 per purchase. And I gradually cranked it all the way up to, I think $4,000 per purchase over the course of like a few weeks as they got up to speed.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's no accidental, whoops, I charged a lot. Yeah. Like when I just slightly relevant thing, there's my first week at Deep Local, the first company I worked at in school. Funny. It was like my first day and they're like, hey, Stephen, we want you on this project. It's this crazy lighting thing for Google. And I was like, okay. And they're like, we need you to figure out what lighting equipment we need to buy. Here's the website, or not even which website, I had to ask vendors and stuff. And in a couple of days, I had a recommendation, and the total cost of the equipment was $135,000.
Oh my God!
And I'm a 22-year-old kid. I just graduated college, and they're like, "So, what do you think we should buy?" I'm like, "It's all this stuff." And they're like, "Is it right?" I was like, "I think so."
Yeah.
And they're like, "Then buy it." So my first week of I had to spend $135,000 out of the gate. Like they offloaded that thing, and that's pretty I guess they could have reversed it.
They didn't have time for the wrong thing to show up.
They didn't have time for So it's also how stressed are you and how much are you just whatever, I'm just going to send it and hope it works. That was really fun.
If you had bought the wrong thing, they would have sent you to the vendor who has the right thing with a plane ticket.
Yeah, exactly. They would have just manifested a correct solution and they didn't have time to have someone more experienced do that. And that's what that job was. But that also well illustrates the balance of how much risk are you willing to take on when offloading a thing. They took on a ton by letting me take 100. That's crazy for a kid. I made the right call. It ultimately worked out. They got lucky, but that's all about your balance of how much do you want to try and offload for the sake of freeing you up to do other things,
Yeah. And for us, what's nice here is the risk is pretty mitigated when we offload because we have really scrutinous QC process for all of our outgoing product.
Right. Yeah.
So it's really easy to let people just get right into it and make stuff. Aside from a gluing operation, things are pretty easy to revert. So all issues can get caught.
Yeah, pretty much. It's pretty hard for something to be permanently messed up. If someone messes up one single item as we're shipping it out, there's not a lot of single items that could be messed up permanently that we'd be like, that's devastating. We're going to lose some money on it, sure, but it's never going to be totally crushing, So even if it is permanently messed up, it's never a huge chunk of things. Parts are replaceable. The whole machine's very modular. It's all right. And another thing we think about with offloading is how evergreen is the task. If I need to do a process every once in a while, and it takes me 3 hours, am I going to spend 10 hours training someone to do it?
Not worth it.
Probably not. Do we have to do it only once? Yeah, I'm just going to do it. I'm not going to try and show someone how to, I'm just going to do it because it's a one-off thing. Is it evergreen? Is this buying me a lot of automation of the task? Or is it, what's my ROI on the time? Building lumens, we will always need to do it infinitely. Always.
Yep.
That is an infinitely good ROI. We train someone and they can now do this thing we'll always need to have done. Infinitely high, infinite ROI. That's great.
For sure.
But some things it's nah, I should just spend an hour every month doing this thing and it's okay.
It's a great one. It actually reminds me of one more that I would have otherwise forgotten. But how many decisions does someone have to make when doing the task?
Right.
So for example, I'm still the one making shipping labels right now because once there's international orders and orders that need multiple boxes and customers with special requests, there's maybe 100 different decisions I have to make in a shipping batch.
Right.
And it would take so many flowcharts and diagrams and technical write-ups to explain our shipping process flow that it's just easier for me to do it.
Right. Yeah.
There's only so many batches we ship. When we outsource that task to others, I end up getting asked 5-10 questions anyway.
Yeah.
So I just do it.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes it's just easier to just do it yourself. You have this great line, if we have a crazy wave of orders and it's oh man, are we gonna, do we need to help out with production or something? I'm like, Lucian, tap me in. I'll help build stuff. And your line usually to me is, I'd much rather that you spend that time documenting the processes to make it better for people than for you to go in because it's the ROI thing.
Yeah.
The analogy is, that we've been using a lot recently is like an empty boat is a 0-day lead time.
Yeah.
Right. The water coming in is our new orders through the leak. And the guys are in the boat trying to bail it out. And the hole keeps getting bigger. The orders keep getting bigger. It's like, I can make it so we can get ahead. Yeah. I can plug that hole a little bit by making it easier to make the machines, by us hiring, all that stuff. I could help bail out the boat, but there's still water rushing in.
Yeah.
You know, like it is a better long-term investment to try and plug that hole and find a way to support this growing influx of water. The analogy doesn't really hold up.
No, it's good.
Yeah.
And it gets at this feeling you and I have when we think of whether we should tap ourselves to join in production.
Yeah.
It's like, it's always better spent improving process, spending some engineering time, making the element easier to build for the subsequent weeks where we're building the machine again.
Right.
Overtime can handle the dynamic nature of like order volume expanding and contrasting.
Sure. Usually, sometimes we do pop in, but it's not too often. Like it's always a decision. It's always, does it make sense to do it here?
Yeah.
You know, like we do it if we have to, but we try and find ways to just make the leak not as bad if we can.
Yeah.
And make the people who are bailing out the boat already make it easier for them.
Yeah, what we're getting at here is it's so interesting to handle a product with a long lead time.
Yeah.
Because the orders placed today will affect us in a few weeks. Mm-hmm. Our headcount can vary by then. Mm-hmm. Our materials on hand can vary by then. The product could change for the better by then.
Yeah.
It's just amazingly dynamic.
Yeah. It's so hard. I'll be like, Lucian, how are we looking for the lead time? And he's like, there is no sentence to summarize that. It's like 3 charts.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, you can't just give me a sentence to answer that question.
Yeah. Like we were trying to drop the lead time down from 4 weeks to 2. Mm-hmm. And I go, oh crap, Stephen, I could have had the lead time listed as 2 weeks and I look at the chart. Oh, no, never mind. Because a couple of orders would have changed my sentiment on that.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Between the morning where I looked and the afternoon when he asked.
Sure.
It's just that it can be that delicate when we have exactly as much headcount as we need.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
We don't overhire.
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly. So yeah, and that also makes the offloading thing weird because like you have to decide, do we have the budget to hire them? You know, and not only that, but like, do we know that we would have the work for them indefinitely? Because like the thing I absolutely hate the idea of is like we hire someone and then we have to fire them or let them go because we overhired.
Yeah.
I hate that idea. So we have to make sure that the person that we're hiring will have the work for them indefinitely based on sales that we've seen. Obviously it's always a risk, you know, like the fact that this company even exists is still a risk, but we have to have some confidence there. Yeah. And that's how do you balance that? What's your risk assessment on that kind of thing of like to offload more stuff? It's tough. And we constantly talk about that.
Yeah, this is not an easy one.
Yeah, it's not an easy one.
And sometimes when you decide to offload, it's to a commercial partner. And Stephen's going to tell us about our current sponsor.
That's right. This episode's sponsor is PCBWay. We use PCBWay for all of our prototype boards, and we use them because they are so fast at getting a design fabricated, sent out the door, and into our office in less than a week. That is super important for us because we run a line that has such quick turnaround. We need to get stuff out the door, and we also want to prototype quickly. Our whole line is designed around quick updates. So the fact that our PCB vendor can also do that for us, we make a design change, we get that design in within a week, and it's also been QC checked by the engineers at PCBWay to make sure I didn't make some silly mistake. It's incredibly important. It's been super helpful for us. Thank you so much to PCBWay for sponsoring this episode. I think you said this before, but like QC, like everything gets QC'd. Mm-hmm. So it's pretty easy to offload stuff. And we'll get into like how we check when people are starting up a little bit later. But we QC everything, especially when they're just getting started. Oh, yeah. So like, might as well toss them into it, see how they do. Mm-hmm. The Mobo Pogo Pin jig that I made videos about like a couple of years ago, it's really, really easy to train for. Mm-hmm. Super easy. We need it all the time. Seems like a great opportunity to offload.
One would think.
But if one diode is backwards on it, of a certain subset of diodes, the whole jig gets nuked. And it's a 3-hour detour for me to fix it. I'm the only one that uses that jig. That is the piece of production that I consistently am the only one that does to ship machines. It's like I'm pogo pinning. I'm all visually QCing all of those motherboards. Make sure because I don't want someone to have to come to me and be like, Stephen, cancel your afternoon. I nuked this jig and now production's messed up for this build. Like that should be me.
It used to be that way. And we just felt bad.
Yeah, we felt bad, and it would suddenly nuke stuff. You know, because like they don't necessarily know which parts they need to double check, and if they miss them, like I spend a lot of time double checking all of them to make sure I'm the one who has to deal with the jig getting nuked. Yeah. So I'm paying attention to it. So I do that. I can't wait to replace that jig. Oh my God,
Yeah.
dude. I'm so excited for making that thing.
On that one, and brings us back to a point, it's not worth our time to try to train people to use that jig more safely, because sometimes a perfect looking board can nuke it. Like, so the only way out of this one is like through the process of making that jig better for the, like in future revisions of the motherboard.
Right.
So it goes back to bailing out the boat versus making it better.
Exactly. Yeah. The new version, we're working on a new version of the motherboard that's all SMT. Aside from a couple parts we really can't make SMT, just to make it easier for us to build. It's effectively the same motherboard.
Yeah.
And we're going to change how we do some of the testing to be more consistent and easier. And like, I learned a lot from that jig. It is not made optimally. We can make a lot better, but that work is going to allow all QC testing on motherboards to be offloaded off of me. I spend X number of hours making the jig, updating the motherboard, and then now it's completely offloadable.
Yep.
So yeah, that's kind of cool.
For sure. And then you mentioned you have in here videos.
Yeah, you can pry them from my cold dead hands. I will not offload those. And I'm saying that kind of in jest and also kind of not. Like the videos on my channel, I mean, ultimately it's still Stephen Hawes, and it's my voice and the branding and the tone of it. And like I've seen YouTube channels get editors and they still keep the original tone.
I float the editors constantly, but with such an information dense video category of like electrical engineering, how are they going to know what to show? Yeah.
And like, I also have developed a way that I will talk to the camera and know what stuff I'm going to include and what I don't, and how I cut it together. And like, it's not nearly as stream of consciousness as it could be. So I don't know. That one's not easy for me to delegate. Also, it's like my baby and I don't want to give it up.
And it's literally your channel.
Yeah. And editing also doesn't take that long. It takes me time, but like shooting and figuring out the video is really the big thing. I have my keyboard shortcuts for Final Cut. I just zone in for a few hours and I get the edit done. So it's not that bad. And we actually tried offloading a little bit of this for our feeder launch video.
It went pretty okay.
It went really well. Yeah, it was cool. The team was awesome. It was much more cinematic and much better shot than I would have done it. And it was kind of okay. We didn't have the control over it because like I still wrote the script. I did the voiceover. We had editorial, comments, and they made a couple tiny changes, but they pretty much freaking nailed it out of the gate. Yeah. Great firm. So I don't know. It's kind of tough. That one, I'm glad that one definitely took me out of my comfort zone. I was a little uncomfy during that whole thing. Like, oh, I don't have the video. Like I'm not doing the video, but it ended up being really good.
And in that unique situation where we paid someone for once, like we didn't really have the time for you to edit that video.
Yeah.
It ended up kind of being a toss up on whether it saved time or not.
Yeah.
But it was really comforting to have another team responsible for that video being good, another team responsible for the other social media assets out of it.
Yep.
Just to not have to think about it.
It was really nice. And it's also like, I might have, because I still had to do a lot of the management of that thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like whenever you're offloading something to somebody else, you still have to kind of manage them and make sure that it's working well and it's on the track that you want it to be. So there was some of that, but yeah, they did take a lot of that off my plate, and it definitely did save me time, and it did turn out to be a lot better than what I would have made. Way cleaner, way cooler. It's really if it was worth the money. I think it was probably about a wash, probably about worth it. The video is great. I mean, it was really good. I'm really happy with it too. I'm glad we tried it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a lot of fun to have a whole shoot day at the office. Like that was a fun, stressful day.
It was fun being called up to be on camera. I remember I took 10, 20 tries to get the feeder inserted smoothly because I hadn't used them nearly as much as Stephen by then.
Yeah, that's right. Trying to figure out that was so funny, and I could see you every time you tried. You got more and more nervous. You're like, oh no. You got it.
Yeah, and I have a gnarly hand scar on my left hand too. I was like, it's gonna be more distracting
than the feeder. Yeah.
It was a fun day.
That was a fun day. Yeah. So that was a good example of doing it, or at least trying it. Yeah. Trying it out, trying it on.
It's always fun to try outsourcing in a non-committal way like that.
Yeah.
It's a great way. Getting a contractor in for a video shoot's a great way to try on like a full-time editor.
Sure. Temporary work, part-time work. It's a good way to see what it's like, and try people on that way. Hiring part-time, moving to full-time. That's another good way to kind of like, what is it like to outsource this kind of thing? Contractors are the best. So yeah, it's a good way to kind of dip your toe into it if you're not sure.
For sure.
Yeah.
So if you've decided to outsource and like bring on some extra help, how do you do that? A big thing there is training. And we've tried that so many different ways. We've tried having people watch videos, read forums. We've tried having them just figure it out.
Yep.
For us, it came back to OHI.
Yes.
That's the open hardware assembly instructions.
Yep.
So if we're hiring for the assembly team, I'm going to start off by saying we don't ask people to do things that are undocumented by and large as much as possible.
Yep.
Especially for someone new.
Yeah.
I might have someone who's like been here a year more, like pioneer the instructions, but if you're new here, you're going to start off on the production line by reading our assembly instructions back to back a couple times, and then we're going to throw you to it. Build something once or twice.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's great because it's also a ground truth for what is the meta? What is the correct way to do it? You know, if it's just ambiguous, people can do whatever they think is right or makes sense. And like, we've gone through and figured out the best way, the quickest way to assemble things. Like when we were writing the feeder assembly docs, like you and I bashed our head against a wall trying to figure out what's the optimal method for assembling a feeder. Do we do this step first? Do we do that step first? Sure. What's the quickest way in terms of movement? There's a great video from, there's a YouTube channel called Fast Cap. Really interesting. The dude's super into like Kaizen and lean and like all this stuff. Wacky channel. But they have a video where they like have this operator like bagging a spray bottle and a spray can into like cellophane or whatever. And they time how long it takes her to do it. And they watch her hand movements and they're like, what if we moved this here? I noticed it took you 2 seconds to grab this film. What if we separated them out this way? And they just refine the process. It's really cool. It's like a little wild, but it's a cool thing to see how you optimize that. And we did a lot of that for the feeder. It's written down there for a reason. So it kind of adds the ground truth answer, which is a really nice thing to have.
Also there too, like what's not said is where we allow people to like figure it out for themselves.
Right.
Like we don't have a 30-step set of instructions for how to fold a cable perfectly.
Yeah. Yes. You
don't want to be too verbose because you just let people have space to figure it out.
Let them introspect.
Yeah.
It's like, we only hire smart people.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, you can figure it out. You know, like some of these things are just self-evident. And it's like, it's too overblown to be like, fold the cable at, 7 inches at this point. It's like,
I don't have time to write it that explicitly.
Exactly.
I have a joke about OHI is I don't write it for fun, and every word is important.
Yep.
There's not, if anything, there's words it needs, it doesn't have.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's nothing optional to read,
right?
To skip past.
Sure. Yeah.
That's why the pictures are a great way to catch someone up if they miss something. Mm-hmm. But every word needs to be internalized and understood when there's training.
Yep. So having someone read it is really good. And like, especially for the instructions for QCing motherboards, when I'm teaching someone how to do that, they don't know any of the stuff in that at all. And I still have them sit down for 20 minutes and just read it. Because I just want them to be like, what the heck is DFU mode? And then they learn. And I still want to just prime the pump a little bit so they know some of those things. And then we just walk through it and they kind of like almost connect a face to a name kind of thing. And then that's usually what we do is, we'll have them read through the OHI and then we do it with them once, twice, depending on what the thing is. And then generally let them do it a couple times with us around. So if they run into a weird question or something, we're there to immediately help them fix it. Or there's someone else on the line that has done that thing before that they can help answer a question. When I do this for running the Lumen, what I'll actually do is before I bring them into Mendel and teach them how to run the Lumen, I will intentionally mess up a couple config parameters in OpenPMP.
I always think it's so mean, but it's helpful.
I don't expect them to figure it out. I start running the job and something happens where it like doesn't pick apart or it doesn't place it correctly or whatever. And I'm like, okay, so what do you think the problem is? And they're like, well, it probably was XYZ. I'm like, okay, cool. This is, you're right. Or no, it's this other thing. This is how you go to solve it. I show them where it is in OpenPMP, navigating the UI, figuring out where it is, solve it so that they immediately get an example of if I do run into this in the future, they've literally seen the problem happen. It's not that useful to watch me walking over the Lumen, hitting go, and then just letting it run. It's like, cool. Yeah, that's fantastic, ideally, but if something happens,
it's just not useful.
You need
to see what issue.
Exactly. The point about being able to do it really well is like reading our docs, understanding how the machine works. Like the fundamentals of understanding it is what's really important. And you can do that by, intentionally introducing a bug and showing how to fix it is a great way to show them this is how you ultimately solve the problem.
I remember it reminds me of someone newer was building an assembly here, and almost everything possible went wrong. And it was their first time building it.
Oh yeah, yes.
And I was feeling myself getting agitated at the time, and I was like, actually, no, this is great.
Yeah,
because it gives them a chance to experience everything possible that could go wrong.
Yes.
Poor timing for our production quotas that it was all at once, but they learned more than they would have otherwise by just following the instruction sets like routinely.
Totally. And that also leads nicely into like, you and I know these processes really, really well. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to remember that like these people don't know necessarily anything about the machine when they're first starting. People that we're teaching, and we're talking heavily about techs here.
Yeah.
But this also goes for knowledge workers. It goes for anybody. We have all this context. Mm-hmm. I remember starting at Formlabs, like a lot of startup companies, they have a lot of like goofy like nicknames for things, you know,
roller
like
dude,
mixer
dog.
Exactly. It's
crazy
like
engineering terms.
you just, and it's just the Sanic board, you know, you come up with these goofy names, and you're like, what the heck is this thing? There's a lot of like local terminology to understand, you know, like what does CP40 mean? What does N75 for a nozzle tip? Like some of these, it isn't even stuff we're making up necessarily. It's like, it's stuff that is like industry terms, you know?
Yeah. And at the risk of sounding obvious, that's why these instructions that we write are so good, because it gives us a common framework for communicating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think anytime you're working with another designer, like it takes you and them a couple of weeks maybe to get a shared visual language to talk about features and flanges and like whatever.
Sure.
Like you and I, even like learning how to talk about like Lumen CAD changes together took a little while to just get each other's bearings.
Sure. Yeah. Figure out how we want to do it and, you know, what kind of things are important to us in the design. And yeah, totally. It just takes a while.
Like half our design meetings like nonverbal. Like,
yeah, we had one yesterday. It was just like, it was quick. I was like, are you going to do it this way? You're like, yeah. I'm like, wait, but, oh no. Oh, wow. Yeah. Like it's all just kind of like our brain. It's fun. Yeah.
So your instructions are your best efforts at getting someone calibrated to your expectations without having to hope they memorize every verbal thing you'd say to them.
Right. Because that's not reasonable, you know? And some people will take notes. And it's like, great. If you feel like you have to take those notes, let me know and I'll put them in OHI. Mm-hmm. Because you shouldn't have to. The notes are already taken for you. You know, you shouldn't need them. And if you do, great. That's something we can add.
Yeah. And having these instructions like this is important for the person outsourcing or offloading because you don't want to have to explain it to multiple people over and over. This is more scalable.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
Maybe if you're building like a black box thing that has a PCB bolted in, it's fine to leave that undocumented, but
Yeah. It's still good too.
It helps. Exactly. The bus test we always talk about.
Yep, exactly. It helps the bus test, which for those who don't know, the test is, does the company stay running if one person gets hit by a bus? And my whole thing about this is I think startup companies should fail the bus test, but only just, you know, because otherwise you're spending too much time writing things down. I don't know. It might be good to pass the bus test. I recently put some stuff in place, so if I die, Opulo is still around. But
don't worry there.
Yeah. That's sorted in a weird way. But yeah, so you know that's a lot of what OHI is. It's setting a standard. So after we run it with them a couple times, they're around, they do it. We go back to our desk. We go back to what we're doing, and if they have a problem, our general guideline is burn 10 minutes. Because we need to move production along. We need to make the stuff, you know, we need to be accomplishing our tasks, right? But if it's written down somewhere, I want you to check OHI before you come grab me. If we've written it down already, I've already theoretically answered your question.
Yep.
So check OHI first. So it also kind of acts as it's not even, you know, offloading the training. It's offloading the questions. Mm-hmm. It's offloading the edge cases where, you know, if something truly is off book, like when the perfect way this is implemented is, we're sitting at our desk and someone comes over and they're like, hey, XYZ happened. And we go, wow, that's weird. That's truly strange. I don't know what.
And we go help them.
And then we go figure out what the problem is and we debug it together. But if it's like.
And then update OHI.
And then, yes, exactly. And then catch that edge case.
Yep.
But if they come over and it's like, did you read OHI? It's like, well, we wrote it. It's down. It's in there somewhere. Yep. Like you say, I didn't write it for fun.
Yeah.
You know, it's a really good tool. And it also catches us because sometimes they'll be like, I don't know. And we'll be like, isn't that an OHI? And we check and it's not.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh yeah, we should have made
my face there.
Exactly. And that's great. It finds that thing. We're like, oh, nope, you're totally right. We didn't write this down at all. Do this. I'm going to document it. It'll be live on OHI in 5 minutes, you know?
And between us, it actually is kind of fun to write.
It is. I love documentation.
Yeah, it's fun.
I love writing documentation. It's a lot of fun. I always volunteer to do it at Forum Labs. And my boss, Jake, was like, what's wrong with you? It's fun to write concisely as well as I can, you know, like I just enjoy that a lot.
I was in tech docs at Mastercam for about 2 years and they would be writing the script and then making a video to explain the feature. So like doing just written instructions is the relaxing part.
Right.
I used to have to do all the screen capture of me mousing through a really complicated UI. I would have like 10 layers of visual overlays because I would not get it to work right.
Right. Yeah.
It was so stressful.
Interesting. Yeah.
I did not have smooth mouse motion.
Oh yeah. Did you have like a tool that would like move the mouse?
I found a software meant for people with Parkinson.
Oh, so it like smooths out your motion.
It was really good.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. And I would always stutter when I went to type Mastercam 2023 into like the text field of the UI.
So you used AutoHotkey, didn't you?
Yeah, I'd press Control 7 or something.
Yeah.
And then it would just type the words I needed at like 200 milliseconds per letter.
That's so, I always wondered how that happened.
Yeah.
That's cool.
I don't know how others do it, but I had big macro pads and Parkinson software.
Man, that does it, dude.
It was great.
That's cool.
I hope that's stuck over there.
Yeah. That's a cool way
a
to
fun
do it.
tangent.
Yeah.
So if you're off, yeah, I can't tie that back.
That was just well and truly a tangent, and that's okay.
That's fun.
So yeah, that's generally how we'll train them up on a new thing. And then after they're done being trained, well, now we're looking at their output.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what are they doing? And again, this goes for assembly techs, this goes for knowledge workers, this goes for everybody. First, it's 100% direct QC on literally every single thing.
Yep.
Like complete, full, thorough. And we generally do this until there's like many builds of no errors for that specific assembly.
And this is per person?
Yeah, this is per person. Yeah. Because, you know, we want to make sure that have they gotten the hang of this where they're doing it consistently every time. If there's a build where, you know, they make something that isn't perfect, yeah, we're going to check every one until I see a few builds where they're perfect, you know? And also that's just really to catch it before it goes through our other QC process. So we can directly give them feedback of like, hey, it looks like you did this thing differently. We should do it this way. Check out OHI, check out this process we have for this. And that's good. I mean, we still will always catch it with our QC. And like we have jigs that do a lot of QC for us where it'll catch that stuff for them.
So an example here, like drag chains. One of our new guys, Lex, was building them for the first time. And he'd done all the aforementioned thing, read OHI religiously, built one, showed us. We said, looks good. But then he works alongside Bryce, who has built a lot of them.
Yeah.
Lex would work next to him while he makes the drag chains and he'd make a bunch and then show them right to Bryce just for review.
Right.
100% of the time, non-optional.
Mm-hmm.
Then when Bryce finally walks up to us and goes, yeah, he's ready. These are perfect.
Then we go to our normal QC process where we're still QCing them, but it's just, we're saving ourselves the time of like having to loop. We're more conscious about giving that feedback to a person who's still learning it and saving us the time of, okay, who made this drag chain? How can we, you know, give them feedback on this thing and blah, 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 going through the QC thing. Like QC should only ever be to double check that it was made correctly.
For sure.
It's not like we want to make them willy-nilly and we catch 18 things going out that was like, oh, this needs rework. Like, that's not the goal.
If we waited until pack out to check the new guys' assemblies,
we'd never ship on time. Yeah, exactly.
At least that first time around for them.
Sure.
It'd be a mortifying experience for them, but it's not fair to them to do that.
Yeah. And
we should keep the stakes as low as they can be.
Exactly. It should never be mortifying. Working here should be fun.
Exactly.
It should be fun to do it. You know, you should like working with your hands. You should like jamming on editing the podcast thing about Mitchell.
Yeah.
You know, like it should be fun stuff that you're working on. Like if it's stressful or bad, it's like, okay, we're not doing our job right.
And in a good way to like make sure it's like that for people is just have a nice path they're set to walk on with the guiding hands of instructions and training.
Yeah. It's a good way to do it. You have this great line that I love, which is perfect, then fast, which is the ethos that we have here of like the first time you make a feeder, I literally don't care how long it takes you.
Yeah, we don't time them.
Yeah, it has to be perfect. And then now I want you to make 2 in that time. Now I want you to make 4 in that time. Now I want you to make 8 in that time. And you go up and you go up and then you hit the steady state of like what we know is reasonable to make perfect feeders in.
Yeah.
But like maybe it originally came from my guitar teacher who's weirdly friends with your dad.
Yeah.
That was a weird revelation.
Connecticut bluegrass scene is pretty tiny.
Exactly. Yeah. But he would say like he would play a riff.
Yeah.
And I would try and play it back at his speed. And he's like, that was bad. Play it as slow as you need to until it's perfect. And I'd play it like horribly slow. And he's like, that was perfect. Now go a little faster. And I go a little faster. And he'd be like, now go a little faster. And then that's how you work your way up. That's how you get good at something quickly. You do a lot of time, then you get up. So that's kind of how we structure it. Perfect first. That is always the priority. Speed is secondary. It's still really important, but it doesn't matter if you're not making it perfect.
Yeah, it's accuracy, consistency, controlled pace, and then you can start addressing your timeliness.
Exactly. Yep.
There's a similar quote from the special operations military community. It's slow is smooth and smooth is fast.
Oh, yeah. No, I remember that. Yeah.
I always mix it up.
Slow is smooth and smooth is fast.
Yeah.
So it ultimately equates to slow is fast.
Yeah.
That's good. I like that a lot. Yeah. You're methodical. You're not rushing.
Thinking about each motion of your hand in time.
Yeah.
And then just pace it up.
I like that a lot.
It's like being present. It's like having an active mind while you're building stuff.
Sure. Being aware.
Yep. That situational awareness.
That's great.
Critical stuff.
Yep.
Yeah. So once someone's up to speed and we can consider them like onboarded, acclimated to the processes, have their wits about them. We just switch on to doing our standard QC process flow, like we said, and that's the buddy check. So everything that goes into a box here is reviewed by a second person. We even have like a whole like bin coloring system to get into here. But it's all to say that people who are new, again, have those guide rails to make sure they do the right thing.
A great example of this is going to be super meta, especially because Mitchell, you're literally listening as we record this, but Mitchell's the producer for the podcast. He edits the podcast. So the first few times he edited the podcast, I gave it a listen through. And I was like, maybe we should do this. Maybe we should do this differently, blah, blah, blah. It was, the equivalent of QC checking it, right? Just for the tone and how do we want to do it? What's the balance of like, what rude little Easter egg do we leave at the end or whatever? And now I don't listen to them. I just trust that he's going to edit them well. And he always does. Or sometimes, what it is now, just like you said, we have a good design language of like, you and I know how to talk about CAD. Mitchell and I know how to talk about, do we want to put something in the podcast?
Right.
He'll be like, listen to this timestamp. And he'll be like, what do you think about this? And we'll have a discussion about that nugget. And I know that the rest of it is QC'd already. We've already done the 100% QC process effectively. And he just knows exactly what to do for the rest of it. So, it applies to everywhere. I want to make sure we're not talking all about text because this goes for any kind of outsourcing thing. Like if we didn't have Mitchell on board and Mitchell wasn't an incredible audio engineer and like knew how to edit a podcast, I would probably be doing it. So, in that way, it would have been outsourced. But also the whole thing was his idea, really. So, yeah, thanks, Mitchell. You kick butt, dude.
Back to what you said about not just being assembly level stuff we're talking about here. Every GitHub release has a reviewer. Every PR double checked. Even if it comes from the open source contributor community, like we don't just blindly merge. What we're saying here isn't optional.
Right. What's actually kind of interesting is that we have the whole contributing page on the Lumen PnP repo. That's like OHI for outsourcing design, kind of in like a weird way. It's not really the same, but it's like, if you want to help contribute, this is the way to do it.
It's a really narrow path that if you want to walk down, it explains how.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, there's an exact way to contribute here thoughtfully and like cooperate beautifully with us.
Yeah. It's similar, but it's not quite the same because it's not like we're offloading it to them. We're still doing it. It's like if they want to contribute, if they have a cool thing they want to add in, they can. So it's a little different.
Hey, I have a couple GitHub issues tagged need help. So if you're listening and you want to contribute.
That's funny.
Don't pigeonhole us.
Fair. But yeah, it's an interesting relationship. It's like kind of the same thing. So that's kind of how we make sure like the quality of the thing is still good after the outsourcing it. You check it a lot and you build confidence. You still do if y'all aren't familiar with like AQL sampling. You can also check every once in a while and just double in and see how things are going that way as well. Just sample a subset manually, but we also do 100% QC on this stuff anyway.
For sure.
So, it doesn't super matter.
Yeah, as a parting thing for this section here, if someone makes a mistake, I will have them update OHI.
Right. Yeah. That's a good method.
And then having people who are new QC finish goods, that really helps cement their knowledge here. And like once I see someone's catching something that I didn't see myself, I'm like, oh,
sure,
they're calibrated.
Right. And you know what? That's actually very similar to how, if Mitchell gets a customer question that he's like, I don't know about this one. And we talk about it. Once we kind of come to a decision on like, how do we respond to this? If they have a question about, lead times or whatever, we'll write it into, we use a Guru is a great service for like documenting stuff, and like stuff gets like out of date when it hasn't been confirmed by someone that it's still accurate. So stuff can't just die on the vine and being like, oh, it says that this is true, but it hasn't been updated in a year. Is it really still true? It will tell you. Exactly. It can't get stale. So Mitchell will make a Guru card. It's just like someone updating OHI of like documenting the thing to help automate it. And anyone else that is on customer support or interacting with customers, or like anyone else that's building a machine and looking at OHI, that kind of stuff is good to still write down. It's worth the effort to write it down.
I think this brings us nicely to our next section of like what to look for when we're trying to offload work and bring on a teammate.
Yes, which we're doing a lot of right now.
Oh yeah, it's growth season for us.
It is 100%. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a book from one of our investors, Joel Spolsky, "Smart and Gets Things Done." That Stephen read at first, and I'm a good halfway through now. Yeah, I'm trying to get caught up to Stephen. He's a fast reader. And it's about how to hire people, and there's a lot to it that we've been learning from that.
Yep, and he kind of puts it all on the table in the title of they need to be smart and they need to get things done. And he has like an Eisenhower matrix style grid of this is like people who are smart and don't get things done are really, cheeky, but they may not accomplish all their goals. He kind of like breaks it down of all the different hierarchies of things.
Yep.
So it's a great subset of rules. And we obviously have more than those too, but like that book is an interesting read. And it's also been really helpful for me of like, what standards do we have for, for hiring and like, where do we draw the line? What should we be looking for? Highly recommend the book. It's good. And it's a quick read. I read in like 3 hours or something. I'll burn an afternoon.
Yeah, it's not bad.
Yeah, it's not too long. And he's funny.
Yeah, Joel's a riot.
He's a freaking riot.
Love that guy.
Yeah. But another check is, would we get a beer with them? We're going to work with these people all the time.
Yeah.
We should like them.
Another candidate we had in the other day put it really nice. Like, we might spend more time with our teammates here than with like a family member or like a spouse.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you have to make sure you like them.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely.
For assembly, it's, will someone listen to these instructions without pushback, objection, or obstinance? So we call it going rogue. Will they go off and do their own thing, or will they be respectful and listen to the instructions? And if they have suggestions, does this seem like the person who will take it through the proper processes and ask for approval to change the course we dictate?
Exactly. If something is truly not working well, to have them be like, hey, I think this is not working well. Because we want to know that. But otherwise, to, go with the flow. So we have OHI written, every word is intentional. It's there for a reason. Are they going to be down to follow that stuff? And if something seems out of whack and they're like, my gut is telling me this is not right, they know to bring that up and they feel comfortable too. And they're going to be able to say, hey, I think this is wrong.
Yep.
And
then lastly, for like the assembly technician roles, like, do they have a passion for this? Are they interested in this space?
Mm-hmm.
Do they like building things? We find that really helps cue someone up for success here.
Yeah, because it also means that they're going to want to stay here because they like making things. They're interested in the fact that we're making a pick and place machine. We're making stuff for electronics and, they're into electronics, they're into building, they're into 3D printers or, something like that shows a passion for that kind of thing means they're probably going to be stoked to come to work. They should be hyped. I don't want to hire someone that's going to I got to go to work.
Yeah.
They should be at least pretty excited, at least kind of stoked to be here. I don't want to hire someone that's like bummed about being here. That stinks.
No, exactly. We don't want people who are here just for the check.
Yes. And like, there's part of that where I think, especially as we grow, it's going to be harder to find people that are only like that. But like, we're a small company. Everyone here should be pretty jazzed about something.
Yeah.
Should want to be able to learn and engage with what we're doing here. Like that's really important, I think. And especially if we want to hang out with these people, those two kind of go hand in hand. They're going to be stoked about this kind of stuff.
We've hired from all walks of life, all backgrounds, all levels of experience. And what we've taken away is this here. It's you can teach anything besides like passion and like willingness to do the job.
That's the biggest thing. You can teach anything aside from passion. We've had people that didn't know what a 3D printer was. They didn't understand anything about electronics at all. Run the Lumen. No problem making boards. Like you can teach it. The passion is the thing that is really like just being excited about it, being jazzed about what we're doing is one of the biggest focuses.
Yeah. It's an incredible motivator to care about what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
And then there's the knowledge worker side of it.
Yes. This kind of thing is like the biggest thing I've been looking for is like ownership and agency. If I give them, a prompt, will they run with it? Will they figure it out? Will they own it? And like I just said, we're still small. We have a lot of things that need done and a lot of things that we might not even have on our list yet that would be good to do, that if someone discovers those, do it. If you find a thing, oh, wow, we should really be doing, bloobity blurp.
Yep.
Go and burn a day. Do bloobity blurp. If you think it's good, do it.
Have at it.
I want you to own it. I want you to figure it out and not have me have to think about it. Figure out if it's going to make sense. And if it does, do it.
Yeah, we're not in the business of micromanaging.
Yeah, exactly.
Like the opposite, really.
Exactly. It's all as much autonomy as possible because, there are not enough hours. If I had one superpower, I would do crazy things for the superpower. I would pause time. If I could do this, I would pause time for probably 4 months.
Genies, if you're listening.
And who?
Genies.
Genies? Yeah, well, what's the cursed thing? After those 4 months, I instantly age 4 years.
You still do that.
I would probably still do that. But to just pause and not have time be a thing and just, I would love that. That would be so good. Anyway, totally aside, but I wish I could pause time. So, but you kind of get that with offloading these things. Mm-hmm. So, having people that have autonomy and are just like taking a thing and owning it is huge.
Yep.
It's so important.
Critical.
Yeah. So that's big. Also should be passionate about what we're doing, especially for knowledge worker of like caring about what this is, especially because we're still a startup. Mm-hmm. Everyone here has got to be jazzed about what this thing is. What are we trying to do here? What problem are we trying to solve? You got to be into it.
For sure. I remember when Mitchell approached us for an opening we had here. Yes. And we got in like a 3-page essay about why is a good move for him, like why he's passionate about the space and like how many 3D printers the man, he has multiple rooms full of 3D printers. Yeah. And it was like, okay, we clearly highly passionate individual.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah.
In a great position to do meaningful stuff here.
Totally. Yeah. So that's a super, super important thing. And it always pays off in spades. You want someone that's on the same page as you.
Yep.
You know, especially for a smaller thing. That's super important. Every hire needs to be good, excellent, perfect, you know?
Sometimes it takes less time to have no one and have an opening than it does to hire the wrong person.
Yeah, that's super true. Like, and Joel's book goes into that, like how bad it is to hire someone that isn't a good fit. It's just such a rigmarole. It's just, it's such a thing.
Yeah, it's an uncomfortable one. So try to avoid it if you can.
Yeah, like, you know, and it takes a lot of learning and it's impossible to get it right every time. But, you know, you start to figure out what to look for. You start to find out what's going to be a good fit and what things are important for the kind of organization that you're running. And, you know, it just takes time. But yeah, super important to get it right. Like Joel's book is helpful of like, if you're even a little unsure, it's a no. If you're like, yes, but it's a no. It's like, it's a good way to be.
It's brutal, but it's from the angle of self-preservation.
Yep. And wanting to make sure that what we're doing is, you know, everyone's on the same team here. Are we all excited about what we're doing? Are we all kicking butt? But this isn't a hiring episode. Maybe we'll do an episode about hiring.
And all of this ties into one of our old bosses at Formlabs' rule of 3.
Yeah.
Give someone an assignment if they like it, they're good at it, and it's useful for the company. Mm-hmm. And ideally, they check off 2 of those. Either they're good at it and they like it, they like it and it's good for the company. All 3 is awesome, though. Yeah. That's a trifecta. Mm-hmm. Aim for that way you can. But you don't want someone to do something just because they like it.
Yeah. or just because they're good at it, but they hate it and it's not useful for the company. Or it's useful for the company and they're not good at it and they hate it. That sucks. Like you should get at least 2.
Yeah.
And like even the one where they like it and they're good at it, but it's not useful for the company, that's still useful to give someone that task every once in a while because it's helping them grow. They're stoked at the company. You know, they're exercising them being good at something. And of course it has to be at least kind of good for the company, you know, but maybe not critical path, but like something good. You know what I mean?
Like Google has that 20% rule where like 20% of their time could just go towards things they're interested in.
Right. And like that is that subset, you know, and ultimately they do end up being good for the company too. So they're a little sneaky about that one, but yeah, same kind of thing. It's so true. It's such a good rule. And if you just have one, you should probably put them on something else, but aim for all 3. If you can find someone that's really good at something, they love it, and it's super useful for the company, keep them on that thing. That is critical path.
Yeah. You want to make sure everyone's happy, and that's a great way to do it. Mm-hmm. Giving people work that they feel connected to, they enjoy doing, and they're good at.
Yep. Like I think about at Formlabs, there was stuff where like I wrote like a white paper about millifluidics. I was probably fine at writing the paper, but I really liked it and it was useful for the company. It probably needed a lot of edits before it was ready to. I remember the edits. It needed edits before it was ready to see prime time. That is a great example of, you know, I wasn't great at it. They were trying me out on that thing, but it was useful for the company and I liked it. And then there's other things where, you know, I had to deal with some, you know, annoying problems that I didn't like dealing with, but I did know how to solve them. And it was really important for the company. So I did those too. Like it's a give and take. It's really hard to find the stuff for all 3, but if you can, hang on to it. That's like such a good thing to offload.
Yeah, don't mess with that.
Yeah, don't mess with that.
But yeah, that's a lot to it. That was a great question we got from
Appa OG.
That was a great question from Appa OG.
Yes.
So thank you for asking that in the Lumen PMP podcast channel.
Mm-hmm. And if any of y'all have any other topics that you want us to talk about, pretty much before we go and we record these, we have a list of all the episodes that have ever been recorded. And we also check Discord. So if you have an idea, we will probably talk about it. Like Appa OG literally wrote this the morning before we recorded. We're like, that's a great episode idea. Let's do that one.
Yeah, we even postponed the one we were planning to do because it was like, oh, this is fantastic.
This is a good one. So yeah, just let us know. We will probably do an episode about it eventually.
For sure.
Cool.
All right, guys, that's it for this one. Thank you so much for listening. Please don't forget to leave a review wherever you get your podcast. It really helps us out a ton. You can find Opulo on Twitter and Instagram. Also, please don't forget to check out opulo.io and sign up for our newsletter where we write blog posts, white papers, and do customer interviews with other folks building cool open hardware. That's it, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thanks, everyone.
You want to contribute there? I'm running. Like I feel like we said all this already. Sorry, Mitchell.
Want to pull your weight, Stephen?
Yeah. No, you're doing great. And so, yeah.
I know. It's just funny how you said it.
You're like, oh, Lucian's gonna be profound for sentences, and I'm like, no, bud.
Profound.
Not this one.
Be nice to yourself.